Greetings and salutations. I've been asked this many times, and out of 7,500 plus videos, I'm surprised I'd not made a specific video about this, but I've been asked about it many times, about past life recollection and the metaphysics thereof. Genuine metaphysics, unlike belief systems and religions, which are based upon 99% hooey and nonsense and completely implausible ridiculousness. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, you don't have to understand it, you just need to believe in it. Real metaphysics is actually hyperlogical. It's based in wisdom, of course, necessitatively it must be. And it is rational. It's not any sort of hokum or phooey. Actually, one of the best metaphysicians, easily, not one of, I take that back, the best metaphysician who ever lived. This is my non-hardback copy. This is Dr. Nandakitish Kumaraswamy, who wrote so many books, even though he died in 1947. They're still publishing his stuff up until past the year 2000. He knew 27 languages, wrote countless books and hundreds of articles. And nothing I'm going to quote in this video is actually found in his two articles in this book. It's called Metaphysics, collection of articles. There's one article, it's quite long, it's called The One and Only Transmigrant. It actually gives you a lot of quotes from the Upanishads and the Vedas regarding transmigration, and also to recollection, Indian and Platonic. So even he doesn't get it. He's a really brilliant metaphysician. Once again, actually the best. Very, very brilliant. To know 27 languages and to have written all that he's written is absolutely quite phenomenal. I'm going to give a couple simple analogies, and I'm not interested in quoting countless passages from the Vedas because that doesn't give anybody insight into past life recollection. It is the case, necessitatively so, that people confuse a lot of things, but primarily several fundamental things like the idea of karma and the idea of reincarnation. Reincarnation is not the same thing as rebirth. Polygenesis, or in the Pali the word is punabhavati, which means again becoming. These two are not connected. Bob, Sue, Larry, so on and so forth, they do not transmigrate at the time of death. Bob, Sue, or Larry is a consubstantial construct of matter and spirit, two different things. Collectively, of course, they make up the life and conscious recollections of Bob, Sue, or Larry, for example, or whoever that may be. Personal reincarnation of Bob, Sue, or Larry would imply directly and obviously direct psychophysical transmigration, which is both extremely illogical and absurdly impossible. Then you get into the belief systems and the religious stuff, which is most of which is illogical and just hokum. I'm not interested in what is irrational and illogical. The metaphysics of past life recollection is actually hyperlogical. I'd like to get directly into it. Obviously, that which is the impetus, which is not a cause, the uncaused cause or primordial attribute, existential attribute of the absolute, which causes, of course, someone to be born to begin with, or paticca samuppada in Pali, which means dependent origination, i.e. primordial agnosis, but agnosis of what, by what, and do what. To say agnosis, which is a privative before gnosis, or wisdom or illumination, is no different than saying illumination relative to light, agnosis. In other words, the light which is directed away from itself. But that is not anything other than the light itself, i.e. the extrinsic attribute of same. And then, of course, I have to get into a long diatribe, take many countless videos to talk about the principle of the metaphysics of emanationism. Emanationism is the basis for the Upanishads, original, and I emphasize original Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, Plotinus, Numenius, Syrianus, Proclus, Damascus, Porphyry, Pythagoras, on and on and on. Very, very simple, yet it confounds people. So you have two modalities of a personal being, just as there are two selves. Every form of metaphysics speaks, of course, of two different selves, the terrestrial self, Bob, Sue, or Larry, that psychophysical self of flesh, blood, so on and so forth, and the transcendent self. There's actually two modalities of ignorance, conventional ignorance and transcendent ignorance, which of course is privative. The agnosis modality, which is a trans-death personality. We know for a fact, and there are millions of examples of this, and I've talked about this endlessly, of disembodied beings due to whatever level of ignorance and or evil. Evil, of course, is the willing of ignorance, who respond to their names, of course, and they will do the things, even though it's not directly visually possible to see that through near-infrared and countless other means. There's a lot of electronic devices that are used. And they'll do the things that they were known for in life. So we know that a personality transcends death, but we cannot say that conventional psychophysical Bob, Sue, or Larry, which is the conglomeration, the consubstantiality, meaning a composite of two or more things, right? The consubstantiality of spirit and matter, of course, does not transcend death. When death occurs, this is the breakup between matter and spirit, 100% undeniable. So where then is the personality, even though that's not exactly a correct word, which actually transcends death? And I'd like to give a simple analogy. Once again, the radio analogy is quite brilliant. That's one of the analogies I'll give here. Meneme or sate, meneme of course is Greek, sati or smriti, means recollection, but it doesn't mean conventional recollection, like, you know, what did you eat for breakfast yesterday? Recollection, or sati, of course, is not based in existential consciousness. The Pali term for birth recollectors, people that recollect prior births, incarnation, the word for that is jatasari, people who recollect their past lives. Anyway, like in the article, One and Only Transmigrant by Dr. A.K. Kumaraswamy, he doesn't understand it. He wrote a quite extensive article in this book, and it is a brilliant read. We give you enormous amounts of passages, but he doesn't actually make the connection and tell you anything I'm about to say in this video. Punabhavati means again becoming. There's these principles of a transcendent vision of disembodied being, which of course, just like in a dream state, when you're walking around and you have very detailed vision in a dream state, is no different than a disembodied state. Ultimately, i.e. after death, where a personality remains, which of course is undesirable. Because past life recollection and metaphysics thereof, of course, is based on the agnosis and the agnosis modality of personal ignorance, i.e. terrestrial or conventional ignorance. And that is a submodality or an inner modulation I'm about to talk about here in a second, give a perfect analogy for that. Both of these are 100% undesirable, obviously so. People want to hold on to their personality, but everybody is a totally different person. You know, it could happen overnight, like you get in a bad car wreck and you're completely a changed person. You realize what's important in life, what's not important. The person that you were when you were younger is not the person that you were when you're older. Unless you're stupid, really stupid people are the same people. It's like, that's the same fool I knew when he was younger in college. He hasn't changed a bit. In other words, there's no personal growth. And there's personal growth. You are a different person. You're genetically identical, but that's a totally different person. And people don't connect and seem to understand this. Anyway, like in the dream state where you have a dream body, we actually have the same thing as in a disembodied state. And these are perfectly metaphysically accurate words for saying monomayakaya, which means mentation made body. In other words, it would be like a dream body or a spirit body. Dibakaku refers to vision, a heavenly vision, but it doesn't mean like, you know, seeing things where you're alive. It means a sight that you have, like the same sight that you have in a dream state, and it's the same sight that you actually have as being disembodied. So what is the premise and simplex analogy of past life recollection or memory? Sati. And it's not conventional memory, which is based in consciousness. Psychophysical, conventional, terrestrial memory. The best way I could actually think of it as a former ham radio operator, I don't know if you could look this up, it's called sideband imprinting, or upper sideband or lower sideband modulation. You could be listening to the frequency, either in amplitude modulation or in frequency modulation. You won't hear a thing. Or you might hear something, but there's a totally different broadcast. I just thought of this just now. They actually, in that movie Contact, they were listening to the frequency, and then the blind guy realizes, like, oh, there's something totally different on the sideband. There's the one-time movie actually talks about sidebands, probably the only occurrence. In other words, there's something totally on the sideband frequency. And the same is true in ham radio. It's called upper sideband or lower sideband modulation. You could be listening to the right frequency and not hear a single damn thing, because you're actually listening to the frequency modulation, or specifically in ham radio, you'd be listening to the amplitude modulation. But you'd have to listen to the upper sideband or lower side, like advanced ham radios, there's a button for USB and LSB, upper sideband or lower sideband modulation for listening to and or also to broadcasting on SAM. It requires less energy. So what it is actually, I was trying to think of like interfrequency modulation. You have primordial agnosis, which would be analogous to amplitude modulation or frequency modulation, primordial agnosis. Then you would actually have a subset of personality, which people love to cling to personality, but from the standpoint of all forms of Greek, Indian, and Egyptian metaphysics, personality is that which holds you back. It's the same reason why you want a real definition of hell. Imagine like a record skipping over and over. You ever heard, most people, young people, never listen to a record, a vinyl record, to like be a scratched record. It'll skip over the same spot over and over and over and over and over. And a true definition of hell, where personality, this subset frequency of sympathetic resonance or personality, exists after death. Just like upper sideband and lower sideband modulation, where once again AM frequency, amplitude modulation or frequency modulation would be analogous to primordial agnosis, but upper sideband and lower sideband would be the personality imprint that persists within that which you truly are, i.e. the big self, the transcendent self, after the breakup between matter and spirit, i.e. the psychophysical persona non grata, which of course is buried, 6 feet under and given a headstone. It is completely ridiculous to think of personal reincarnation. There is no such thing. That's the one thing he actually gets right. And he's very, very brilliant. He's literally the best metaphysician ever. He tells you there's no such thing in the Upanishads or the Vedas, and he gives you countless citations. And it's the article, you could download this book too on various places online. It's an article called The One and Only Transmigrant. I was actually friends with his son, the Ramapi Kumaraswamy, who gave me the rights to all of his father's works, as long as I didn't charge for them. So once again, you'd be listening to the right frequency, but not hear a single damn thing. So this would be a subset or intermodulation. Most people don't realize that. They think when they listen to an AM station or an FM station, most people are not ham radio operators. So there's upper sideband and lower sideband modulation, and this would be an intramodulation of the signal. The signal would be analogous to the soul, which is under primordial agnosis. It's under modulation. And of course, this is the principle and meaning of suvi mutta chittasanabana, thoroughly liberated spirit, means nirvana, or yoga chitta vritti nirodha. The subjugation of becoming, yoga chitta vritti, chitta, subjugation of the perturbations of the nous or spirit, perturbation, vritti. Vritti is no different than saying frequency. It means modulation or perturbation. Well, the frequency is a perturbation. Yoga, the fruit of yoga, i.e. liberation, yoga, chitta vritti, nous perturbations, nirodha, the ending of or the subjugation of. So we have two modulations. There's the modulation of spirit, i.e. primordial agnosis, and then we have this intramodulation, which would be analogous, nearly a perfect analogy, of upper sideband and lower sideband modulation. So you have two modalities of ignorance. And you want the definition of hell, you not only have primordial agnosis, which has either been dialed down some, or in the case of evil people, dialed up. And then you actually have this personal intramodulation, where these disembodied beings are literally doing the same damn things they were doing when they were alive, opening the same doors, sleeping in the same bed, not that they're actually literally sleeping, but in their own mind in this horrific dream state, which is no different than hell. They're doing the same damn things. This is not like one or two evidences of this. There are millions of evidences of this all throughout history, long before all this fantastic ghost hunting technology existed. People knew this, like, yeah, the grandpa died or so-and-so died, and they're opening the same door, and there's like a cold spot in the, but they're doing the same thing they were doing when they were alive. So there is that imprint. And another analogy of this would be I don't know how much you know about hard drives. When you actually erase a hard drive, you're not erasing a damn thing. You're actually erasing the table of contents, which says that the drive is now empty to write over top of it. All the information is still there, residually. This is how they extract information of a hard. You could actually write over it. You could erase it and write over top of it, and yet the imprint, and you could look this up. Bit of an expert on hard drives. Quite an expert on hard drives, actually, including fixing them, at least back in the day. You could pull the information like a year plus later, after you erased it and have been writing on it for a year. Pull off the residual ferromagnetic polarization on the hard drive. It's still there. That's kind of a crude analogy. It's like wiping it clean. You know, when you wipe a drive clean, well, this would be, you know, separation between matter and spirit at the point of death. It's like now a new hard drive is being written, even though it's the same hard drive. It's been wiped clean. We've wiped the slate clean. You ever heard that saying before? Everybody has. Remember, wipe the slate clean. That's kind of like when you write on a notepad and you tear the paper off, you don't want anybody to read it, and you crumple it up. A smart person actually can take shavings of charcoal or graphite, and they'll see what you wrote underneath on the paper that was underneath from the pencil or pen impression. It's like, oh, no one, I don't want anybody to see that, and then crumple it up and throw it in the fireplace. It's still there. You don't really have to throw the whole notepad away. There's another little great analogy of imprint recollection of past life. But this is not reincarnation. This is residual imprinting of personality, which is a intramodulation or a subset of ignorance. This is not desirable. Your conventional person thinks, oh, I want who I am to persist after death, and that sounds good to me. From the standpoint of all forms of metaphysics, this is 1,000,000,000% undesirable. That is not something you want. You're dialing up the amplitude on ignorance with not only the ignorance itself, which you're trying to eliminate, at least the wise person would want to, but you're actually setting up a subset modality of conventional ignorance, this intramodulation, analogous to upper sideband or lower sideband. It's like, well, death has occurred, the hard drive is wiped clean, like when you go and format the hard drive, it's erased. It's like, no, all you did was erase the table of contents. A lot of people think, there's the reason why they created a program called BleachBit, which was kind of made famous by one famous politician. The way BleachBit worked is it would write data across the entire hard drive platter over and over and over and over and over and over again, such that you could not, with the best technology that exists in government, extract residual imprint data on the hard drive, or solid state drive actually. It's called BleachBit. It's an application. Because smart people knew that when you erase the hard drive, all that information was still there, even if you wrote over top of it once or twice. That's why the program would write over it and over it and over it and over it and over it, and that's the way you're able to erase it. So, but you get scrubbed as far as personality going out of this world, and of course get scrubbed again going back into this world. You're literally taking the energy, if you will, as a crude analogy, between one hard drive to another. So you're scrubbed going out, you're scrubbed going back in again, but this residual personality does exist. The residual, of course, on the table of contents, the information still exists to be extracted on the platter. But this can't be accessed conventionally. So why can't I recollect past lives, people would say. It's like, well, you can, but you're trying to use conventional psychophysical consciousness to do same, and it is not. It is only accessed through what the Greeks called mneme, or in the Pali the word the sati. It's also too called smriti. Also too the Greek word anamnesis. This is not remembering what you wore or ate yesterday, not conventional recollection. People don't realize there's two types of recollection. There's psychophysical recollection, i.e. based in consciousness, and there's actually metaphysical recollection, which is based in the nous, or the chitta, which is ab extra and antecedent to existential consciousness. Also too, this is another perfect analogy. I hope you understand this. You could actually get in a sideband transmission, say from somebody else, with upper sideband or lower sideband modulation, and you're listening to whatever he or whatever is saying, and retransmit the signal with amplitude modulation, like a regular ham radio broadcast, and someone could be listening to you, yeah? That's what I'm listening to, you know.
Partly cloudy. Highs in the upper 60s.
This is frequency modulation, but if it was rebroadcast on the same frequency, there would be another signal still present, a totally different signal in upper sideband or lower sideband modulation. But this radio doesn't know that. It only knows that on this particular frequency, you're only listening to amplitude modulation, for example.
Lows around 50. Sunday and Sunday.
It doesn't know that there's another signal there. Just as the sentient signal would not know that there's an imprint of past life recollection analogously, not perfect analogy, but pretty damn perfect, in upper sideband or lower sideband modulation. Look up upper sideband and lower sideband modulation. So you can have two totally different signals, like one person's listening to the exact same frequency, but a completely different thing by listening to either upper sideband or lower sideband. But you're listening to the exact same frequency, but listening to something totally different, like what I just broadcast there, but you're only listening to it because the radio is told to only listen to it, say, analogous to conscious listening, i.e. amplitude modulation, yet there's two signals present there. The residual and the TOC, the table of contents, and the Platter erase, the information is still there. This is, of course, sympathetic resonance of spirit. This is no more difficult than saying intramodulation, what was the other way? Yeah, interfrequency modulation. In other words, subset modulation of one frequency. You say you got 100 megahertz. I can modulate it, a signal, which would be analogous to consciousness, and amplitude modulation or frequency modulation. Okay. But you have a subset of that, or intra-frequency modulation. The interfrequency modulation analogous would be upper sideband and lower sideband. So past life recollection is real, but it is not that which anybody is. That is not Bob, Sue, or Larry, because the breakup between spirit and matter, which makes up Bob, Sue, does not reincarnate. Well, Bob, Sue, or Larry was reincarnated. It's like, no, Bob, Sue, or Larry inhabited this body, which is dead in the grave, and that was that consciousness, specifically that new sort of chitta, which manifested as this consciousness of the living being. That is impossible to reincarnate. Westerners are very, very confused about reincarnation versus polygenesis or rebirth. There is no talk about personal reincarnation anywhere in the Vedas or anywhere in the Upanishads. That's not my opinion. That's a substantial fact. I hope you like this video. Any donation is warmly welcome. I love covering topics that nobody else on YouTube can cover or talk about. They don't have the intellect to talk about it. Any donation is always greatly welcome. My email is in the description below. And so too are all the links, including a lot of free books that I've written for you, and articles as well. Lux Veritas, have a lovely week. It is really cold outside. It's like burr cold. Yeah. Thanks. Goodbye. Nailed it!